Oh hi, welcome back to another episode of Blacked Up Miniatures and Paints. I'm Kevin. This week we are bringing you a Spacewolves Aggressor, the new Primaris models. Basically with Primaris taking over as the big baddies and really pushing Space Marines out of the way. Unfortunately, I've had to start making this transition in my army. They really have some great rules. They really do well in Overwatch if you kit them out with flamethrowers. I really like these models, so let's check it out together. First coat we're coming through with is going to be Minitaire Nautilus Blue. My similar workup to my other Spacewolves, I like coming through with the nice deep dark blue just to lay down the base color. Next we come through with Indigo ink and white ink mixed 1-to-1. This gives us the nice rust gray color, and then from there we can really just pop the highlights out and make it very contrasty. So we go 3-to-1. We make a giant jump here. It's a lot of white, very slight undertones of the blue. But with inks, they tend to dry and become a little bit duller as they dry. So this stark white we're looking at to begin with really tones down and blends into the model. Color we're coming through with is Vallejo Metal Color Silver. We're just going to use this to cut in all of the silver details, his flamethrower, the little tubes coming from the back of his power pack, any of the metal bits around his boots and around his legs. Just take your time and pick these details out. Unfortunately, with the way this thing is sculpted, it's very difficult to get to everything and not jack up your previous layer of paint. If you haven't tried this stuff is friggin' phenomenal. It does a great job. It flows super easy off the brush. Definitely pick this up. It is well worth the money and it covers very well. So we're gonna do everybody's favorite task and start edge highlighting this beast up. He has a ton of edges, panels, lines, everything you can think of to sit here and pick out and highlight. Just do it. It's so worth it. It takes this model from a 9 to a 10 all day long. Some of the real bright areas where the white inks were, I had to switch to an Administratum Grey, so you may have to do that. Base was Fenrisian Grey, but some of it I worked up to a Administratum Grey. That way we could go through and just really pop that highlight and make it stand out. It looks very stark whenever you first lay it down, but it does dry and get a little bit duller, so don't worry about that. Not a big deal. So anybody who's seen my previous Spacewolf videos knows that I do this weird thing. It throws a couple people off at first, but it really does create a good result. We undercoat with XV88 on the shoulder pads. They're not going to be brown. They're not going to be this weird color. It does look awfully weird whenever you first do it, but whenever you come through, paint it with the other tones, it really does just make them go on so much easier, especially yellow. Everyone knows yellow is a rough paint job. So I really think Russ would be very disappointed with how little gold these Spacewolves are sporting. We've got the Aquila on the chest, we've got the little Aggressor key box thing he's got going on, and then I added some extra little bits on there, but really there's not much fur, there's not much gold. It's quite disappointing. Where are my Spacewolves at on these new Primaris models? This is out of the Start Collecting Spacewolf box, so I was like, hell yeah, they're going to have a whole hell of a lot of gold and whole hell of a lot of fur. Not so much. That's okay though. I will say I do think that they should have some big old wolf pelts that you could put on the back of the power packs. I think if you had a big king dingling of an Aggressor sitting there with some furs on his back, he would just look like a boss bitch. So we're coming through next with Abbadon Black. We're hitting all the little rubber tubes coming from his power pack. We're also hitting the soft joints between his armor. I will say, to this model's credit, there's not many between the actual arm plates, so that's easy. But do make sure that you get the tube behind his knees and then his undercarriage. Don't ever forget about the undercarriage. So now we get to start seeing the trick in full effect. We come through with Mepheston Red and go straight over this brown. Next Level Painting did a really good video on how browns are just like the secret weapon to all colors. It's kind of true. If you're going to red, you're going to yellow, hit it with the brown first, those colors will just stick to it so beautifully. And continuing on to the other side here, again, you do that brown undercoat, you lay this yellow on top, you only have to do a couple layers instead of a friggin' million, so it really saves you time, and it's an easy trick to go ahead and just cheat. There's no sense in wasting a billion seconds sitting here painting the same color over and over and over to full opacity. If you can cheat, take a couple extra seconds to paint it brown, and then boom, it comes to yellow. So here I'm glazing with Evil Sunz Scarlet. I'm focusing on about the top half of the shoulder pad here. Basically all we're trying to do is take a really watered down thin paint and just start laying it on top. You will see a little bit of a paint line transition, not a big deal. Go back to your Mepheston Red, glaze that. Notice the way I'm taking the brush strokes. I want the most paint to settle at the very top. When you're doing the Mepheston Red, if you need to fix a line, you go downwards towards the darker color. Alright, so continuing the glazing, we're mixing Wild Rider Red and Evil Sunz Scarlet 1-to-1, super thin, and we're just focusing on a smaller portion. We are going to cover a lot of this up, so don't be too stressed out about it. On the yellow shoulder pad, we're mixing Cermite White and Averland Sunset 1-to-1, and again, we're just focusing on about the top half. We work it smaller and smaller until we get a nice highlight going. The Abbadon Black again. Here we're just picking out his wolf emblem on his shoulder pad. We're just going to paint that black, we'll highlight that up in the next step, and then we also cut in his pack markings on the other shoulder pad. I wasn't able to get that on camera, unfortunately I just wasn't paying enough attention, but look at pictures, do the pack markings, don't be afraid to freehand some stuff. It really does an awesome job bumping the model up, and it's really easy. I made a pretty drastic jump here, which turned out great. I recommend doing this on these small details. We went to Administratum Grey and we're just picking out the raised areas on this wolf on his shoulder pad here. It really gives it a good effect as long as you're working with a very thin brush tip. If you try and do some really fat highlights in here, it looks like hot garbage, but take your time. So here we're coming through with Screamer Pink for the ropes on the front of his belt. I didn't know what color to paint this. I wasn't really sure, so I just kind of went with what I know. I've done a couple ultramarine aggressors in the past, and these purple ropes, for whatever reason, look really good. Here we're using 2 parts XV88, 1 part Ushabti bone. All we're doing is highlighting up the bones on the front of his belt here, and also the wolf belt. We did base coat this earlier in XV88, so if I failed to mention that, I'm sorry. Make sure you hit this with XV88, that way it starts with a nice brown color, and you can come through and just highlight it up from there. With his face, all I did was focus on the nice raised portions. He's got some very good sculpt lines for a furrowed brow and stuff like that. Just give it the attention it deserves, and it'll pay off in dividends. Alright, so next we move up to XV88 and Ushabti bone 1-to-1. All we're doing here is focusing on a smaller portion. We want the darkest colors in the crevices, and then we want to sit there and have it steadily progress to a lighter color as we get further and further away from the crevices. Same concept with his face. All we're doing is focusing on a smaller portion of what we already highlighted. I will say I changed this up a little bit because it was looking too much like bone. We did mix some Kislev flesh into it, and that brought it back to a pinker hue. Really helped it to sell it as a skin tone instead of a bone color. Alright, finally we settled on Ushabti bone and XV88 1-to-1. We're working very small sections at this point. We're hitting the tips of the bones, the tips of the skulls, and then tiny parts of the face. Again, we moved a little bit to Kislev flesh just to give it a pinker hue, but make sure you just highlight these sections up. To the ropes here, we went to Emporers Children. Typically I use pink horror, but honestly I just grabbed a pink and said screw it, let's try it. It turned out well. It turned out without any sort of issues or problems. I think it might be a better highlight color because it is darker than the pink horror. So give it a rip. All we're focusing on is the very tips of all the little rope bits. Now we're coming through and just giving it a wash, all the golds with Riekland Flesh. There's not too much to do here. As you can see from a little bottle cap, we're working with a very small amount. There's not much to do. And then to wash the metallics, we're using Nuln Oil Gloss. I really think when you're highlighting metals, using the gloss really does help. Whenever you use the regular one, it just mats it down really badly, and it just doesn't sell the effect you're going for. If you can afford to get the gloss, I definitely recommend it. Otherwise, you can take some black washes and throw in some gloss mixing medium. Definitely help out. So to start highlighting up the gold, we move into Liberator Gold. We're not going to waste our time highlighting back to Retributer Armour. There's absolutely no sense. All we're doing here is focusing on the outer portion of the Aquila feathers, highlighting those up to where they're still super dark in the recesses, but then they start highlighting up. We're working towards the outside 50% here. Then we move to Runefane Steel and Liberator Gold mixed 1-to-1. Again, we're just working on the outer portions of the Aquila. We're going to go do some spot highlights on the skull, on the tops of the Aquila, and then we're going to make sure that we do the outside 50% of what we already highlighted up with Liberator Gold. If you haven't tried mixing these two together, definitely give it a rip. It gives a very good yellow gold color. So the final color that we're going to use for this model is just straight up Runefane Steel. We're focusing on very, very small areas. We're just hitting the very top of the skull on the Aquila. We're just hitting the very, very outermost edges of the Aquila. And then we also switch to a dry brush here in a minute, and we hit all of the tubes on him and all of his flamethrower components.
Alright guys, so here's our finished product. Super happy with the way it turned out. I'm really starting to dig the way these indigo and white inks play off each other to create a really cool effect on these Space Wolf models here. So I'm glad I could bring this to you. Glad y'all could check this out. I just based it real simple to match the rest of my army. So again, this is Kevin with Black Dot Miniatures and Paints. Glad y'all keep checking me out week after week. It really helps the channel if y'all leave a like, comment, or subscribe. Tell me what you want me to paint next, and we'll start getting it in the queue. Just let me know. As always, thank you, and bye for now.